Good afternoon. On behalf of Dean Strample and the College of Osteopathic Medicine, I'd like to welcome you to the second of our series. The college sponsors our visiting minority faculty, Slavery to Freedom, American Odyssey. The college is privileged to assist in bringing this series to the MSU and the Lansing community. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to also thank the other agencies that are listed in your program that assist in the sponsoring of this program. My task this afternoon is simple. I get to introduce the member of our faculty who makes this all happen, Dr. William Anderson, DO, a fellow of the American College of Osteopathic Surgical Specialties. Dr. Anderson is a clinical professor in Osteopathic Surgical Specialty Department at MSU COM, and he serves as the Associate Dean for the Kirksville College in the Michigan District. He is responsible for the development of osteopathic clinical education programs in the St. John Health System in the Detroit area. Dr. Anderson has the well-known distinction of being an important figure in the nation's civil rights movement. He was a friend and colleague of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Dr. Anderson himself was a pioneer in this movement, serving as a founding member and the first president of the Albany, Georgia Civil Rights Movement. More recently, Dr. Anderson has served in a variety of leadership positions within the osteopathic profession, culminating by being the first African-American president of the American Osteopathic Association. Dr. Anderson is a graduate of the Des Moines University College of Osteopathic Medicine. He holds honorary doctorate degrees from the Ohio University, the New England University College of Osteopathic Medicine, Kirksville College of Osteopathic Medicine, and more importantly, from the Michigan State University. He has received numerous awards from the profession, and including the Walter Potengi Medal of Public Service from MSU COM. I believe all of you that know Bill recognize the privilege of working with him and having him as a friend and colleague. It is my privilege to introduce Dr. Anderson.
Thank you very much, Gail. And I told Gail as we were coming in that he might invite those of you who are sitting in the back to come up closer if you like. And if you will, I will make a promise to you. I will not open the doors of the church, and I will not take up a collection. How's that? So if you feel like you want to come up closer, please do that. There will be some others coming in later, and let them sit in the back. I want you to know it is indeed a privilege and pleasure for me to at least be one of the participants in putting this series of lectures together. This is number 10, and some of you have been here from the first, and I presume you will be here even in years to come. And Mark, I see you brought your wife again. That's wonderful. So happy to see you. Let me acknowledge the presence of Chris Jacobs. Stand up, Chris. Let us see you again. I wanted to. That's Chris, her husband. Her husband, Dean Jacobs, was actually the motivating factor behind this series of lectures. He contacted me some 4 or 5 years ago and said that Michigan State University needs more exposure to what African Americans have brought to the building of this great nation. And I want you to put together a series of lectures that will point up these contributions. So what we have attempted to do in this series is to bring distinguished scholars from the civil rights era and distinguished scholars who are currently involved in this continuing struggle toward freedom. So we're very happy to have one of those today. Let me also acknowledge the presence of my team. Somebody said one day I called them my girls. I didn't say that. Somebody else said my girls. But I work with a wonderful group, and I would like for you to know who they are. Sandy Kilborn, would you please stand? And Mary Kernock and Beth Corey, would you all stand? These are the three people who make me look good. And those of you who have ever been in a leadership position, you know how it is your staff that can either make you look good or make you look real stupid. And I don't need any help to make me look stupid. I can do that by myself. But I've had these people, and they have been wonderful to work with, and they make me look good. You do know that Wyatt Walker was promoted as the person who would be appearing here today. As a matter of fact, he was scheduled to appear here last year. Unfortunately, he had a stroke just about the time last year when he was committed to come here, and he had a stroke again this year. Unfortunately, this second stroke was even worse than the first one, and he has some residual paralysis on his left side. But his mind was still sharp, so he knew he had made this commitment to come back to Michigan State University, and he says, I want you to get my very good friend, Franklyn Richardson. He's a man who has integrity, he has leadership ability, he is knowledgeable about music, although he's not a music major. He's been a pastor for over 28 years at the same church in Mount Vernon, New York, and incidentally, in conversation with him, I discovered that the church that he pastors, the Grace Baptist Church, a 4,000-member church, is the same church where my brother was assistant pastor, did we say over 40 years ago? Over 40 years ago. So there was a kinship here that he and I did not recognize. So it was even more of a privilege and a pleasure for me to get to know Reverend Franklyn Richardson, pastor of the Grace Baptist Church in Mount Vernon, New York. But then I learned more about him in that he attended Virginia Union University and Yale Divinity School and earned a doctorate from United Theological Seminary, and he has many honorary degrees, and he serves as an adjunct professor at the United and New York Theological Seminary. But he's probably best known for his writings in faith-based community development, some of which he will talk to you about today. And his works in Power of the Pew and Mission to Mandate would make interesting reading for all of us. He has served for a number of years as the General Secretary of the 8 million-member National Baptist Convention and on the Central Committee of the World Council of Churches, representing some 400 million Christians in 150 nations. He has a wealth of experience in his travels, in his writing, in his lectures, and we are very fortunate to have him on campus today. So please help me to welcome the Right Reverend Dr. Franklyn Richardson. Dr. Richardson.
Permit me to thank Dr. Anderson for those kind words of presentation and for the privilege of sharing with you today, standing in the shadow of my dear friend, Dr. Wyatt Walker, who is a living legend in terms of his contribution to the struggle of African American people, and for that matter, the struggle to make America all that it ought to be. I am grateful for the kindness extended to me by Dr. Anderson. We came up this morning and we had an hour traffic delay on one of the highways. It didn't make any difference what number it was to me. I never knew where I was since I left the airport. But once we got released from the traffic, he did not tell you that he's also an airplane pilot. And we flew low to get up here from that point on. And so I have certainly enjoyed myself here this morning at the breakfast and then at the music school where we talked to young people about the evolution of black church music from the time that predates even slavery up until this present moment. It has been a marvelous transformation and evolution that has mirrored the social issues of the culture in the music of the black church as it has evolved. I stopped at the little gift shop, I guess, and I was getting I was looking for something for my sinuses, and there was a leave or something, and she was making sure, and something she offered me would make you drowsy. I said, oh no, I can't be drowsy. That's my job, to make the people I'm going to talk to drowsy. I can't. And so I'm just delighted to be here with you and to share and to acknowledge that this From Slavery to Freedom lecture series is here in African American History Month. And my remarks today will try to honor that. And I'll be willing to discuss and take any questions at the end on any aspect of what I say or any aspect of what I represent. in this long. I'm not one of the participants, frontline participants in the civil rights struggle. I guess I'm one of the grandchildren of the civil rights struggle, or the sons of the civil rights struggle, because I have been near many of those who were participating and have been involved in it, as one who has a responsibility and feels an obligation to carry on the legacy of the civil rights struggle into the next generation. We have a tremendous, awesome task before us. But let me begin by expressing my delight in sharing here with you. The theme around which we have been gathered, from slavery to freedom, is instructive and speaks of origin and destination. Slavery as origin and freedom as destination. Nevertheless, slavery as the origin of African Americans is restrictive and does not place the experience of Africans enslaved in its proper context. That context is episodic, meaning only that the experience of Africans enslaved is an episode in the journey of African Americans. While it is true that the origin of black people in this country is slavery, it is too often viewed by too many that nothing of consequence occurred in black life prior to slavery, a matter I will address later in this presentation. In light of the theme chosen for this occasion, my remarks are presented beneath the title, African American Achievement, the Journey is the Destination. The telling of African American history ought have as its objective the communication of the pain and struggle overcome by African Americans to achieve success. And in many instances, the success was mere survival. African American achievement must not be viewed as a particular destination to be attained by a single individual or group of individuals within the African American community, but the evolution of a journey which produces a process where black people may have full opportunity, devoid of racism. The goal of African American achievement must be the total elimination of racism and its effect on all people of color, so that the destination is a journey which leads to social, political, economic, and educational opportunities for people of color, thereby fulfilling the promise of America as prescribed in the founding document of this country, that all men are created equal and endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When one talks about African American history, in order to discuss it thoroughly, one must consider the global origins of black people, so as to view African American history in its proper context. Black people predate the terrible, scandalous, and inhumane origins of the African American slave experience. Long before race was an issue or a category, black people predominantly occupied the earth and shaped the foundations of civilizations from the vantage point of culture, science, education, and religion. One must acknowledge that any discussion of black people that begins with slavery in this country is limiting and is a disservice to African American people. Long before black people were enslaved in this country, black people were kings and queens, formulated civilization and cultures, built pyramids, erected mathematical formulas, and inscripted thought. That we observe African American history in this nation is confessional to the fact that racism is a living reality in this country. Racism is not on life support. It is not in intensive care. It is not in the emergency room. It does not have a cold. As a matter of fact, it is not even sick. It is alive and well in America. African American History Month observances ought to function to define who black people are in American culture for all Americans and inspire blacks to achieve in the face of the harsh racial realities African Americans face each day. Racism makes African American history necessary and necessitates a separate view from American history. Racism is the originator and sustainer of the need to tell an auxiliary history about America. The dominance of white supremacy in America has to a large degree buried the historical contributions of black people in this nation. This supremacist attitude that prevails overtly and subliminally has resisted the inclusion of contributions of black people, for the most part in public education curriculum, and systematically devalued black people in American culture. It is truly unfortunate that African American History Month is necessary. African American history is the best and the worst of American history. It is the worst when one considers the awesomeness of the whole slave enterprise, an enterprise which began in the cruel, inhumane dismantling of African American families and the tortuous voyage of the Middle Passage. Black people did not come to the new land on the Pinta, the Santa Maria, or the Mayflower. And black people did not disembark at Ellis Island beneath the Statue of Liberty. No welcoming committee greeted black men and women declaring, "Give me your huddled masses longing to be free." The arrival here of black people is in sharp contrast to European immigrants. Elizabeth Olsen recently, last Friday as a matter of fact, in the New York Times stated that in a book entitled Revelations of a Slave Smuggler, an 1860 book, Richard Drake described loading a boat so completely that not only was the hold cramped, but 50 slaves were tied around the mast and rails so that every available foot of space had been covered with black flesh. In these wretched conditions, the lives of slaves were claimed by the lack of sanitation, smallpox, and other diseases, and despair that drove some to suicide. There took place in the Atlantic a Holocaust. This horrendous postlude preceded the beginnings of the African American history, which started in Jamestown, Virginia in 1619. Black people have always been here. We arrived a year before the Mayflower, 113 years before the birth of George Washington, 244 years before the Emancipation Proclamation, and 5,000 black men fought in the Revolutionary War, though they would not receive the freedom for which they fought. We were co-founders of this nation. Crispus Attucks, the first person to die in the Revolutionary War. And black people have given their lives in every war since that war. No matter what war you point to, black life has been given, black blood has been deposited on the battlefield. W.E.B. Du Bois, who was right when he wrote in his noted book, The Souls of Black Folks, he said this: "Your country, how came it be yours? Before the Pilgrims landed, we were here. Here we brought our three gifts of story and song, soft, stirring melody in an ill-harmonized and unmelodious land. The gift of sweat and brawn to beat back the wilderness, conquer the soil, and lay the foundations of this vast economic empire 200 years before your weak hands could have done it. The third gift of spirit, Are not these gifts worth giving? Is not this work and striving? Would America have been America without Negro people? Would America have been America without Negro people? The very foundations of American economy is literally built on the back of black men and women. The reality is that the slave trade was a remarkable and grim economic engine that went on for 400 years. Stephen Newsom, director of the Anacostia Museum of Smithsonian Institute, states that there is no question that the labor of enslaved Africans was crucial to the rapid development of Americas, laying the foundation for its fantastic wealth and prominence in the world economy. What this is saying here is that it is clear that this nation economically is owing to the contributions and sacrifices of African American people. Now one might say, well, why would we dwell on that at this particular moment? We dwell on that because we must set the framework for the remedies that are necessary for the future. If one does not acknowledge the debt and the contribution that African Americans have made in the development of this country, one will not be ready to come forth with the remedies and cures necessary to correct the disadvantages and the biases that exist in our culture today. So it is very important that we begin by laying a clear understanding that the African American in this nation has not had a free ride, has not just been carrying, but in fact carried the nation on its back and arms and built the foundation upon which this wonderful economy that we now enjoy was built on. Without the free labor of the slave, there would be no America as we know it today. And the advantage that America has would not exist. When one truly understands African American history, one recognizes the obligation that America has to its black citizens. No one can successfully debate the sacrificial contributions that African Americans have made to the development of this nation. Nor can it be successfully argued that we have not made progress in the last 50 years. Nobody would argue that we have not come a long ways. That is not my point here and now. Since Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954, we've come a long ways. It's a long ways from the plantation to the Hall of Congress, where 40 African Americans serve, and many others, even in this state, African Americans serve in the legislature and in important roles in government in this state. It is a long ways from the slave house to the governor's mansion in the life of Douglas Wilder, the former governor of Virginia. No question, we have made stirring advances. It's a long ways to black CEOs in major corporations in America. Men like Ken Chenault, president of American Express and CEO of American Express, or Richard Parsons, CEO at Time Warner and AOL, to the Secretary of State of the United States of America, Colin Powell, and Condoleezza Rice, or in the case of the last administration, Ron Brown and Rodney Slater. There's no question that black people in America, in single instances, one by one, have made advances and have begun to integrate into the American arena of activity. Yet, these high-profile examples of achievement do not negate the vast inequities that exist in this nation between blacks and whites. Some people would suggest by pointing to those who are successful that all of our problems are over. Some would point to a Ron Brown or a Colin Powell, or point to a Condoleezza Rice, or point to some athletic figure or some music person who makes multi-million-dollar salaries or revenue, and say black people are doing wonderful and they are achieving and the doors are open now. But my brothers and sisters, that is not accurate. The facts bear out that African Americans still suffer from the reality of racism and live with it every day in this great nation of ours. These high-profile examples do not tell the total story, and the picture is much different. We have a judicial system which dispenses justice unequally, resulting in a disproportionate number of young black men in the prisons of this nation. In America, there are more young black men in jail than in college. Now, that might not be an alarming figure until you consider that in 1970, there were more black young men in college than in jail. The reverse of that is true in 2003. There are more black men. Isn't that a devastating figure? A notion that there are more black men, young black men today, in jail than in our colleges across this United States. And one can argue that it is, to some degree, the fallout of racial values and racism that continues to persist in this nation that is the result of that. In our public schools, in the inner cities of this nation, we have deplorable conditions. Black children are not only being miseducated, but in some instances undereducated. In other instances, there are places where no semblance of education is taking place. And these young people get socially promoted and get integrated into our society ill-equipped to participate, to make a contribution, and then they are frustrated and seduced by the temptations of drug activity and crime, and end up being the feeder system to sustain the prison complex that this nation is quickly building and developing. We have a nation that is building more prisons than it is putting money in schools. We are more invested as a nation in the development of prison systems, and there are economies in this nation that are dependent, living off of those who will be incarcerated. Do you not know that there are some now who are studying the numbers of prison cells that we will need in 20 years from now based on third grade reading skills, based on the reading performance of third grade children in the inner cities? This is deplorable. America has the capacity. It does not have the will. We have the resources to make our educational systems work. We do not have the commitment. We do not have a commitment. We have not put money in education. We have not valued our children. We have not valued the professionals who teach our children. We have underpaid teachers and we build prettier prisons than we do schools in the inner cities of this nation. The prisons are much more technologically sophisticated than many of the schools that our children are being developed in. And we wonder why we are not going to be able to compete in the global. It is bad business to perpetuate racism and underteach our children. It is bad business to go forth in this nation and continue to ignore the miseducation of so many in our nation. Poverty continues to be a reality among the masses of African American people in this nation. Lack of opportunity in education continues to perpetuate this negative social pathology. It is clear to any attentive observer that we are a long ways from where we should be, and action must be taken which affirms. Slavery was action which affirmed America and gave it economic advantage to the extreme disadvantage of those enslaved. Slavery, let me say that again. Slavery was action which affirmed America and gave it economic advantage to the extreme disadvantage of those who were enslaved. Now, America must continue to take action which affirms the sons and daughters of those so ravishly disadvantaged by that reality. It is regretful that the President of the United States of America does not see the need for aggressive affirmative action policies to be enacted so that the playing field of opportunity may be made level for all citizens of the United States of America. The recent action by the President, or words by the President, and his participation in the University of Michigan's case as given on the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr. is a case in point. The recent actions turn back, set back a long struggle towards full inclusion of all of America's sons and daughters. The business of affirmative action oughtn't be a partisan issue in the politics of America. The issue of affirmative action, of affirming those for whom the action that affirmed America caused extreme disadvantage, ought not be an issue of whether or not it was Republican or Democrat. Republicans, Democrats, all Americans ought to be on the side of creating a place where the people who have been disadvantaged extremely get an opportunity to come to a level playing field. That ought not be a discussion in a nation that calls itself Christian, that prints on its money "In God We Trust." Any vision of God ought to know that we ought to somehow come to a place where the creation is affirmed and every child and every daughter and son is given opportunity to reach their full possibilities and potential. And it's good business. Not only is it morally right, it's good business. When a segment of your population is left out of the equation, when a segment of your population is left out of the opportunity, you are missing part of the gifts that have been distributed to you by you. Genius is distributed all over town without regard to zip code. It makes no difference. God puts genius all over town. He puts it in black homes, in white homes, on the south side, north side, east side. And when we fail by some superficial demarcation to take advantage of that genius, we are the ones who lose. Who knows? Some little boy in the ghetto who without privilege or opportunity may have the stirring dynamics engaging in his mind to offer a solution to cancer or AIDS. Who knows? Just think what it would have been like if Colin Powell had not been given the opportunity to participate in the enterprise of America through affirmative action, or Condoleezza Rice. We would not even know these people if it were not for affirmative action. And as much as I disdain the policies of Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court, he would not be there if it weren't for affirmative action. Affirmative action has had a major role in the life of trying to put something right that was wrong. I don't understand the reluctance toward it. Do I understand the reluctance? In light of the fact that whenever we have disadvantaged the nation in war, we immediately come up with some way that we can recover the pain. That we dropped the bomb on Japan and immediately spent resources, millions of resources, to try to correct the inflict. And if and when we drop bombs on Iraq, we already have a recovery plan for how Iraq will be fixed and will be maintained in the Middle East. Well, a bomb got dropped on black people in 1619, and there has not been sufficient activity to correct the damage that has been occurred in that circumstance. Overwhelmingly, those blacks who've been given the opportunity in government today have been the beneficiaries of affirmative action. But we must not despair at the difficulties that we face. For was it not Frederick Douglass who said, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress"? He further said, "Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are men and women who want crops without plowing of the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the roar of its mighty waters. Power concedes nothing. It never has, it never will." The challenge we face in this room, in places like this, in the fresh dynamic of our centers of education, in the university, I'm so blessed and privileged, and I find hope when I go to universities, because I believe that the solutions to our social pathology are somehow buried in the positive environment where our young people come with fresh minds that can be shaped. I do not believe that the future of correcting America's wrongs are in those who have left the campuses. I believe that the future is in the development of those who come here with fresh minds, looking for answers, with idealism, waiting to be reinforced by adequate education and wonderful opportunity. To be here at Michigan State today is a privilege to come into the setting where some young mind, hopefully, will be touched to see a world through a prism that is not tainted by the color of somebody's skin or the kink in their hair or features that do not belong to the majority community. The challenge we face is to create a world that is so inclusive that a differentiation of history would not be necessary. Yet, we know that that time is not soon. But that objective must loom over us and instruct our national behavior. We must not grow weary. We must not give in. We must not give up. We must hold on to the vision of an America where all people have opportunity and all people have access to resources and health care. We must not give up, because if we give up, America loses. If we give up, we will have abandoned the hope that has brought us so far. We must not give up. The Negro song sung in some of our churches is, I don't feel no ways tired. Nobody told me that the road would be easy. I don't believe that the Lord brought me this far to leave me. Our commitment to a world where competence defines opportunity and not color. A world where character becomes the margin of whether or not somebody is given privilege. A world where a person's merit will make a way for it. Martin King believed that. He believed that the world would one day come to a place where competence would compensate for bias and hatred and racial discrimination. He said it like this. He said that Ralph Waldo Emerson said in 1871, if you can build a better mousetrap than your neighbor, even if you build your house in the woods, the world will make a beaten path to your door. And this becomes increasingly true. We must not set out to be a great Negro doctor or a great Negro lawyer or a great Negro skilled labor person or a great Negro beautician, for if we do, we've already flunked the matriculation examination into the University of Integration. If it falls your lot to sweep streets, gone out and sweep streets. Sweep streets like Michelangelo carved marble. Sweep streets like Shakespeare wrote poetry. Sweep streets like Beethoven composed music. Sweep streets so well that the whole host of heaven and earth will pause and say, here lived the great street sweeper who swept his job well. If you can't be a pine on the top of the hill, be a shrub in the valley. If you can't be a main road, be a path. If you can't be the sun, be a star. For it isn't by size that you win or you fail, but be the best of whatever you are. Maybe the day will come. I will not abandon the hope that competence will be the criteria for inclusion, and color will fall from distant shores and not be the category by which we separate our humanity. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Dr. Reverend.
Certainly, Dr. Richardson, you do have some good Baptists in this room that you can recruit for your 04 campaign. And certainly, we met earlier with the pastors of this community, and Dr. Richardson shared his vision, not only for the convention, but also for this nation. His voice is a rising voice, a strong voice, not only for the National Baptist Convention, but here in America. So I'm honored to have had a chance to sit and talk with Dr. Richardson and to hear him talk about his vision and his perspective on everything from the war to affirmative action. And I think it's another blessing to have a leader like him come into our community. And so I thank you for coming, and certainly Dr. Anderson and the College of Osteopathic Medicine for continuing in this third year. And we were talking earlier, we want this to continue, even in light of pending budget cuts at the state level. And we want this commitment to continue here at Michigan State, because this is an important series, Slavery to Freedom, and it has our support, and certainly Dr. Anderson. Dr. Anderson is speaking next week. He gave you a preview of some of his, that was his preliminary remarks to what he's going to be doing. And, but he has shared over the last 3 years that I've been associated with the program, stories that you never hear about at breakfast, lunch, private conversations. He has so many stories about Dr. King, about some of the men and women who are part, that names we know that were part of the civil rights movement. And I certainly look forward to hearing him share those stories and his perspective on next week. So I encourage everybody to come out. That's my plug for Dr. Anderson next week. But Dr. Richardson, truly it's been a blessing to have you here in our community, and I want to present you with a special tribute from the Michigan House of Representatives, which recognizes your presence, your ministry, and your visit here to Michigan on this day. But also want to present you with a great seal of the state of Michigan. This is something that I don't always do. I usually bring a resolution, but I have followed your ministry over the years, and certainly know that God's hand is upon you as you go forward, not only as leader of the convention, but also a voice for our country. So I want to present the resolution and the seal on this day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
This concludes the lecture for today, and we'll see you all next week. But please stop by and shake his hand and have a glass of punch and a cookie. 2 cookies.